Hey guys, hope you had a great weekend. And I'm just sitting here watching some of the football playoffs, and thought I'd give you some notes about some of the beginnings of China and its first civilizations and its first what's called dynasties. Just make sure you take your notes. You don't just write things down, but you listen to what's being said, and know that you will be having some sort of quiz here in about 2 weeks over this unit. So let's just jump in. Two big parts of the geography of China are these two major rivers. The first is called the Yellow River. It's almost 3,000 miles long. It runs east and west, uh, and a big major part of the where people would live, but also it would flood, and so it actually became nicknamed China's Sorrow because it was when it would flood. Unfortunately, the people who lived near it, it would be deadly and it would kill them. But it also brought good news because when it did flood, it brought all this great soils. In other words, all this really good soil was in the river being pushed and pushed down the river, if you will. And then when it flooded and then the flood water went away, that topsoil would stay on top of the ground there. And it was great for growing food. So even though it killed people, it also brought life to them because it brought good farmland, if you will. The other river, which is a little longer, is the Yangtze River. It's about 3,400 miles long, and it also had good soil around it for good farming. So you can imagine the majority of people were probably living in and around these rivers because rivers bring you good water, give you a source of food and transportation, and even protection from your enemies. The rest of the geography or the land of China really separated it. Most of the land, except for around those rivers, was covered in mountains or deserts. The Gobi Desert, it was in the north, pretty dangerous desert to try to cross. There was also a desert called the Taklamakan. And then you had a lot of mountains in the south as well. So because of all the land, the deserts and the mountains, the people were actually very separate from each other. And until they get unified, they're actually going to be separate kingdoms kind of at war with each other, trying to figure out who's going to basically take over all of China. The dynasties. So what you need to know about a dynasty is it's a line of rulers that belong to the same family. And these sometimes would last for hundreds and hundreds of years. Basically, what would happen is some family would take charge, usually by force with an army, and then they would be emperor, if you would, and they would be emperor until they passed away, and then they would then, it would be then the emperor. The next emperor would usually be the next firstborn son, and so forth. And these would go on for a long time until another ruling family or dynasty would conquer and take over. The very first known Chinese dynasty was known as the Xia, even though it's spelled with an X. I believe it's pronounced Xia dynasty. And the very first capital of China was in Anyang. Okay, Anyang. And so the first capital, Anyang, first dynasty, Xia, we don't know a lot about it because it was so long ago. There's just not a lot of history to help us understand it. But they were the first known dynasty or family of rulers. After them come the Shang dynasty, which we do know a little bit more because we were able to find artifacts and find more history of them. The Shang dynasty built the first Chinese cities throughout the kingdom. Their religion was polytheism, which meant they believed in many gods. And they also believed in spirits like mountains and rivers and sea. Like there was all this kind of natural spirit in the world. And they would actually make offerings to keep these many gods happy, to bring rain and to bring good soil and to bring good sunlight and good weather and just those good things in nature. Okay. The Shang art was a pretty big part of their culture, and we have actually found many pieces of this to kind of see what their culture was like and what their art was like. They made vases and dishes made from a beautiful white clay. They also carved statues from ivory, which are from the tusk of elephants, which is very rare. In fact, it's illegal today to make things out of ivory because of all the elephants that have been killed for it. But they also used jade, which is this beautiful green rock or stone, and they would make statues out of it. They also were good at making sculptures, vases, cups, and then these bronze bells made of this kind of greenish metal. In fact, here are some pictures of that. So if you look here, is some of that jade I was telling you about. This green stone, they covered things out. And then these are these bells that the Shang dynasty is really famous for. So they're made of this bronze, kind of greenish metal. And the bells actually weren't just, art. They could actually make sound and make music. So they're pretty famous for that. All right. After the Shang dynasty came the Zhou dynasty. And when Shang falls, people actually rebelled against them because the Shang rulers were so harsh and treated their people really wrong. And so the people rebelled, and under the leadership of this great warrior Wu Long, they went against the Shang rulers and conquered them, and they started the Zhou dynasty. The Zhou dynasty then ruled for about 800 years, which is a long, long time, right? Almost 1,000 years. They put aristocrats, or the wealthy landowning people, in charge of different territories. And so during the Zhou dynasty, China really grows. It grows significantly, if you will. Another thing that happened during this was this thing called bureaucracy, where the appointed officials in charge of different areas of the government. King was in charge of defending the kingdom, making sure the army was doing its job and conquering more land and defending from enemies, where the aristocrats, these wealthy landowning people like the nobles, were put in charge of the different areas of government. Okay, and that was the Zhou dynasty. And one kind of important thing about this dynasty was the very religious, spiritual belief system they had. They believed there was definitely a link between heaven and earth, and that was the king, or the emperor, was that link between the people and the gods in heaven. And it was really the king or the emperor's job to carry out different religious rituals to keep the gods happy. Okay, and they believed what was called the mandate of heaven, that the heavenly law, the God-given law, right, gave the king the power to rule. It was his mandate. He was chosen by God due to his talent and his virtue. And because of this, it was believed also that if he were to stop having good virtue and good character, that he could actually be then removed from being king. So the two things that the mandate of heaven did was, one, it introduced something called the Dao, D-A-O, which was basically rules that the king had to follow, which is good. So the king can't just do whatever he wants. And it was then the king's duty to keep the gods happy. And if things happen, there was an earthquake or something bad, they believed that the gods wouldn't be happy. And that was the king's fault. If a natural disaster occurred, it was his fault, and he would often be replaced because of it, which doesn't really seem fair, but that was what they believed. Okay, truly believed it. And then the second thing was that the Tao gave the people rights, not a lot, but a little bit, which said they could overthrow the king if he was dishonest or evil, which was kind of hard to do in many cases because the king had so much power and had an army that would follow his rules. But it said that the king was not a god. This was important, that there were gods, and then below the gods were the king. They allowed the king or the emperor to not get too much power. So the two things mandate of heaven does is the Tao, which says rules to live by. The king must keep the gods happy. And the second thing was, hey, king, you got to do your job and take care of, doing the right thing. And if you don't, because you're not a god, you're just a person. If you're not, you can be replaced. So I hope you learned a little bit about the first early dynasties. Number one, understand that the dynasties were ruling families that ruled for a long, long time. It stayed in the family and passed on from son to son to son to son, and basically until they were taken by force. So that's it. Hope you have a great day. Put these in your binder or your folder, and be ready. We'll be taking some more notes this week, and then be ready for a quiz next week. Great. Have a good day. See you.